Today, we're going to venture into the icy forests of the north with 7 terrifying stories involving the Wendigo. Get ready to hear chilling tales about this legendary creature from Native American mythologies, a cannibalistic spirit that possesses humans and transforms them into monsters hungry for human flesh. We'll explore stories of lost hunters, isolated villages, and ordinary people who have had terrifying encounters with this ancient entity. So settle in, make sure all the windows are closed, and let's begin this chilling journey. Oh, and before the howl of the Wendigo reaches your ears, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave your like. This helps the channel a lot and ensures that you don't miss out on any terrifying content like this. Let's go. 1. Endless hunger. In the unforgiving Rocky Mountains, where the winter of 2025 arrived with unusual ferocity, 5 experienced climbers found themselves trapped in a desperate situation. What was supposed to be a week-long expedition in mid-March turned into a nightmare when an unexpected snowstorm blocked their way back to civilization. Michael Tanner, a 42-year-old veteran guide, was leading the group made up of Eliza Chen, an emergency doctor, Canadian siblings James and Sarah Mackenzie, and Victor Reyes, a Mexican nature photographer. All had mountaineering experience, but nothing had prepared them for the ferocity of this particular storm. The forecasts indicated only light snowfall, explained Michael, as the group took shelter in a small cave at an altitude of around 3,000 meters. We should have been able to get down before it got any worse. The wind was howling at over 50 kilometers per hour, creating zero visibility conditions. The temperature plummeted to -14 degrees Celsius during the night, freezing their supplies and equipment. The emergency radio picked up only static. On the 4th day, their planned rations ran out. On the 6th, hunger began to affect his thinking. On the 8th, James Mackenzie, the physically strongest of the group, began to behave strangely. "We need to consider all the options," he muttered as he watched the others sleep. His eyes were particularly fixed on Victor, who had twisted his ankle and would be the least able to contribute to their collective survival. Eliza noticed the change in James first. "He keeps looking at us in a calculating way, like he's evaluating us." On the 10th night, Victor disappeared during his watch. Only a trail of blood in the snow led out of the cave, quickly disappearing under the falling snow. "It must have been an animal," Sarah suggested, but her voice betrayed her uncertainty. James returned from a search, hours later, inexplicably showing no signs of hypothermia despite the biting cold. His lips were stained red, which he attributed to berries found nearby. "There are no berries at this altitude, especially in winter," Michael whispered to Eliza when James wasn't around. That night, as the storm roared in, Eliza swore she saw James squirming in his sleeping bag, his body stretching out at impossible angles. When she mentioned it the next morning, Sarah defended her brother fiercely. "He's just trying to keep us alive. Someone needs to make some tough decisions." On the 12th day, Michael found human remains carefully hidden behind rocks near the cave. Clean bones with marks of human teeth. He confronted James immediately. "What did you do with Victor?" James smiled, his teeth looking strangely sharper. "I did what was necessary, and you will too, when the hunger is unbearable." That night, while the others slept, James began to change. His limbs crackled and lengthened, his skin stretching over a changing bone structure. His moans of pain mingled with the howl of the wind. Sarah woke up to the sounds, watching in horror as her brother transformed. "James, what's happening to you?" "I'm becoming," he replied, his voice now a guttural grunt. "The hunger, the flesh, awakens something. The Algonquin natives warned me about that. Wendigo, he who feeds on human flesh, becomes eternal hunger." Michael and Eliza awoke to find James almost unrecognizable. Taller, thinner, his eyes sunken into blackened sockets, elongated fingers ending in sharp claws. Sarah was in shock, unable to accept her brother's transformation. "We can still help you," Eliza pleaded, her medical training desperately seeking a rational explanation. James, or what was left of him, shook his head. "There's no turning back. The hunger never stops. Never. But I can choose. My next meal." His eyes, now yellowed, fixed on Sarah. "Family first. That's always been our motto, hasn't it, little sister?" Michael tried to intervene, but was thrown against the cave wall with superhuman force. The creature that used to be James grabbed Sarah, who couldn't resist, paralyzed by the horror of seeing her brother transformed. Eliza pulled Michael out of the cave, into the storm. "We can't help her. We have to run." Sarah's screams echoed briefly before being silenced. Michael and Eliza ran through the deep snow, the biting cold almost a relief compared to the horror they had left behind. At dawn, they found an emergency shelter and managed to send out a distress signal. The rescue helicopter arrived hours later, finding them almost unconscious from the cold and exhaustion. "Were there any other people with you?" asked the paramedic as he took them to the helicopter. "They died in the storm," Michael replied automatically. Who would believe the truth? As the helicopter took off, Eliza looked out of the window at the white expanse below. For a moment, she saw an elongated, skeletal figure watching them from the edge of a cliff, its inhuman silhouette unmistakable even from a distance. "He'll go down to the cities when the famine increases," she muttered, "and it always does." The paramedic didn't hear her words over the noise of the propellers. In the Rocky Mountains, the storm was finally beginning to subside, revealing a newborn predator that now roamed its snowy peaks, guided only by a hunger that would never be satisfied. 2. The voice in the blizzard. In the wilds of northern Canada, where the winter of 2025 was turning the landscape into an unforgiving white desert, Sarah Pittman woke up among the twisted wreckage of a small Cessna airplane. The aircraft had crashed during a sudden blizzard while flying over the vast expanse of the Yukon's boreal forest on its way to Whitehorse. Sarah, a 34-year-old photojournalist from Vancouver, was the only survivor. The pilot, a veteran of the Nordic routes called Frank Donovan, was not so lucky. His body, still strapped to the seat, was cold to the touch when Sarah finally managed to free herself from the wreckage. "This shouldn't have happened," she muttered, examining the deep gash in his leg as she tried to organize her thoughts. The forecast didn't mention a storm. With basic survival training and what she could salvage from the wreckage, a first aid kit, some energy bars, a lighter, and her thermal jacket, Sarah set up a makeshift shelter using part of the fuselage. The radio was destroyed, but she knew that eventually they would notice the aircraft was missing and start searching. "I just need to hang on for a few days," she told herself as she treated her injuries. "The flight plan is registered. They'll come." The first night was the hardest. The temperature dropped to -30 degrees Celsius, and the wind howled through the trees with an almost vocal intensity. Sarah kept a small fire going, carefully rationing the fuel available. On the second night, she heard it for the first time. "Sarah," a distant voice, almost indistinguishable from the wind. "Sarah, come." She sat up abruptly, her heart racing. The voice sounded exactly like her younger sister Emily, who had died 3 years earlier in a car accident. "Just my imagination," she muttered, pulling the makeshift sleeping bag tighter around her shoulders. "Mild hypothermia, maybe, auditory hallucinations." But on the third night, the voices returned, stronger, clearer. Not just Emily, but also her father, dead for a decade. "Sarah, we're here. Follow our voice. We've found shelter." The voices seemed to be coming from a specific point in the forest, beyond the clearing where the plane had crashed. Sarah resisted the urge to investigate, remembering the warning in all survival manuals: stay with the wreckage. They're easier to spot from the air. On the fourth morning, Sarah noticed something disturbing. Huge footprints in the snow around the perimeter of her camp. Not bear or moose, but something with 5 distinct fingers, like a human, but too big, and with markings that suggested long claws. That night, the voices became almost irresistible. "Sarah, we're so close. We have food, warmth. Please come before it's too late." Her mother's voice now joined the chorus, describing a warm shelter and supplies. Sarah, weakened by hunger and cold, found herself getting up and taking a few steps in the direction of the voices before stopping abruptly. "My mother is alive," she whispered to herself, realization breaking through the fog of her despair. "She's in Vancouver. How could she be here?" A putrid smell of rotting flesh suddenly permeated the frosty air. Between the trees, about 50 meters away, Sarah caught a glimpse of a tall, skeletal figure, partially hidden by the shadows. For a moment, it seemed to have the silhouette of her father, but then it moved, and she saw that it was something completely different. Disproportionately tall, with overlong limbs and an impossible thinness. Sarah retreated into the wreckage, recalling stories that a Cree Indian guide had shared during a previous photographic expedition. Stories about the Wendigo, an evil spirit born of extreme hunger and cannibalism who mimicked the voices of loved ones to lure victims away from safety. "It's not real," she repeated to herself, although the footprints in the snow suggested otherwise. "It can't be real." But on the 5th night, as the creature drew closer to the camp, Sarah could clearly see its gray skin stretched over prominent bones, eyes sunken into dark sockets, and torn, bloody lips. The smell of death that accompanied her was unbearable. The voices continued, now distorted, as if several people were speaking simultaneously through the same throat. "Sarah, so hungry. Come, feed us." Desperate, Sarah used the last available fuel to build a bigger fire. Remembering another detail from the stories, the Wendigo feared fire. On the morning of the 6th day, Sarah heard the sweetest sound possible, the beating of a rescue helicopter's propellers. When the aircraft landed in the clearing, the paramedics found an exhausted but alive woman, clinging to a piece of burning metal as if her life depended on it. "You were lucky," commented one of the rescuers as they placed her on the stretcher. "Many people get lost in these forests, especially in winter. They start hearing things, following imaginary voices away from the wreckage." Sarah just nodded, her eyes fixed on the giant footprints in the snow that the rescuers didn't seem to notice, and on the skeletal figure that watched from the edge of the forest, slowly receding into the shadows, waiting patiently for its next victim. 3. Cursed inheritance. In the snowy mountains of Quebec, Canada, the harsh winter of 2025 punished the small town of Saint-Étienne with temperatures reaching -35 degrees Celsius. For Daniel Moreau, a 38-year-old anthropology professor, this would have been just another Canadian winter, had it not been for the strange legacy that was beginning to stir in his blood. It all began when Daniel found the diary of his grandfather, Pierre Moreau, hidden in the attic of the family home he had inherited after his father's death 3 months earlier. Pierre had been a fur trader who lived among the Algonquins in the 1940s, and his diary revealed a dark secret that the family had buried for generations. January 20th, 1947. The winter is relentless, and provisions have run out. I did the unthinkable today. God forgive me, but the hunger was unbearable. The shaman saw me. His eyes, he knew. He said that my blood now carries the curse of the Wendigo, which will pass on to my children and my children's children. Daniel initially dismissed the story as the ravings of a man driven mad by winter hunger, but then he began to feel the first symptoms, a hunger that no amount of food seemed to satisfy. "I'm eating twice as much as usual, but I'm still hungry," Daniel explained to his doctor, Dr. Sophie Laurent. "And I have these dreams of hunting in the snow." Dr. Laurent diagnosed a metabolic disorder and prescribed tests, but Daniel suspected something more sinister. His father had died mysteriously, found frozen in the woods with evidence that he had fed on something that the police reports didn't specify. As January progressed, Daniel noticed disturbing physical changes. His fingers seemed longer, his nails tougher. His normally olive skin took on a grayish hue, and he felt constant chills despite not feeling the intense cold that punished the region. In his academic research, Daniel had superficially studied the myth of the Wendigo, a creature from Algonquian mythology born when a human resorts to cannibalism. The spirit of the Wendigo possessed the person, gradually transforming them into a hungry, skeletal, and insatiable creature. "The curse can remain dormant for generations," explained Marie Tallfeather, an Algonquian elder whom Daniel desperately sought out. "But it awakens during extreme winters, when the ancestral hunger returns. Your grandfather must have committed the forbidden act, consuming human flesh." Marie watched Daniel's hands, noticing the subtle changes. "It's already started. His eyes are deeper. The transformation will be complete by the next full moon." Daniel locked himself in the house, determined to fight the growing hunger. He filled the pantry with meat, trying to satisfy the craving that was growing every day. But even after devouring a whole raw steak, the hunger persisted, accompanied by visions of hunting, of being chased in the snow. One night, Daniel woke up in the forest, barefoot in the snow, with no memory of how he had got there. His hands were smeared with blood, and all around him were the marks of a fight. He followed the trail until he found the remains of a deer, partially consumed in a way that no natural predator would do. "It's still an animal," he whispered to himself, shivering not from cold, but from momentary relief. "I'm not that yet." But the satisfaction was short-lived. In town, his neighbors began to notice his cadaverous appearance, his sunken eyes, his extreme thinness, despite his voracious appetite. When the Dubois dog disappeared, suspicious eyes turned to the strange teacher who rarely left the house. On the night of the full moon, Daniel felt his transformation accelerating. His bones crackled and lengthened, his skin stretched over an increasingly skeletal frame. The hunger was unbearable now, a physical pain that consumed him from the inside. Marie Tallfeather had given him one last hope. "The curse can be broken if you confront the spirit of the Wendigo within you. You must recognize the ancestral sin and reject it, even in the face of the most extreme hunger. That night, as the moon illuminated the snow with its relentless glow, Daniel Moreau faced not only his grandfather's genetic heritage, but a battle for his very soul, as the Wendigo's hunger threatened to consume the last vestige of his humanity. What's up, guys? The Wendigo stories are chilling so far, aren't they? If you're enjoying these frightening tales, how about taking a quick break and subscribing to the channel? Just click on the subscribe button below and leave a like too. This really helps the channel grow and motivates me to keep bringing you more terrifying content like this. It's quick and makes all the difference. Now, let's get back to our Wendigo stories, shall we? There's still a lot of terror in the frozen forests ahead. The Last Hunter. In the remote mountains of northern Canada, the small indigenous community of Whispering Pines remained isolated from the modern world by choice. Direct descendants of the Algonquins, the inhabitants preserved ancient traditions under the leadership of the old shaman Mikasi, guardian of sacred knowledge and the last living Wendigo hunter. At 94, Mikasi knew that his time was running out. The visions that had tormented him for the last few nights showed the same omen: eternal ice melting in the mountains to the north, releasing something ancient and hungry that had been sleeping for centuries. He had tried to train a successor, but young Thomas, his great-nephew, had left to study in the big city, rejecting the spiritual call. One cold March morning, Mikasi was found dead in his hut, surrounded by unfinished ritual symbols and scattered medicinal herbs. In his rigid hands, a bone amulet and an incomplete diary with instructions for a banishing ritual. 2 weeks after the funeral, the winter that was supposed to be ending inexplicably intensified. Temperatures dropped to record lows, and a permanent fog covered the forest around the village. Hunters reported finding no animals within a kilometer radius, as if they had run away from something. Sarah Redfeather, Mikasi's granddaughter and a trained biologist who had returned to the reserve to document traditional knowledge, noticed the first truly alarming signs: trees with claw marks 3 meters high, impossible footprints in the snow, and the smell, an odor of putrefying flesh that seemed to move with the wind. "Something is wrong," she told the tribal council. "The stories my grandfather told about the Wendigo, they weren't just legends." The tribal chief, Joseph Blackhawk, a pragmatic man who balanced tradition and modernity, initially resisted. "They're just stories to scare children, Sarah. We need rational explanations." But when 3 hunters disappeared, leaving only trails of blood and broken bones with human teeth marks, the community panicked. The ancestral fear of the Wendigo, the creature born of extreme hunger and cannibalism, which the more it eats, the bigger and hungrier it gets, resurfaced in the whispered conversations around the campfires. Sarah found, among her grandfather's belongings, references to an ice prison in the mountains, where a particularly ancient and powerful Wendigo had been imprisoned by a council of shamans centuries ago. With global warming melting millennia-old glaciers, the supernatural prison was crumbling. Desperate, she contacted her cousin Thomas, now an anthropologist specializing in indigenous mythology at the University of Toronto. Reluctantly, he returned to the reserve, burdened with guilt for having abandoned his training with his grandfather. "I'm not a shaman, Sarah," he confessed. "I studied our legends academically, but I never really believed in them." Together, they examined Mikasi's incomplete writings, trying to decipher the banishing ritual. The notes mentioned specific ingredients: ashes from a tree struck by lightning, the blood of someone who had resisted extreme hunger, and most disturbingly, the frozen heart of the Wendigo, which was to be melted in a sacred fire. Meanwhile, the attacks intensified. Isolated families on the edges of the reserve were found devoured, and witnesses described a skeletal creature over 3 meters tall, grey skin stretched over bones, and sunken eyes that glowed with insatiable hunger. The community fortified itself in the old meeting house. Joseph finally accepted the supernatural reality they faced and organized defense groups armed with the few firearms available, although legends warned that bullets would have little effect against a Wendigo. Thomas, delving into his memories of his grandfather's stories, remembered a crucial detail. The Wendigo was the physical manifestation of uncontrolled hunger and greed. Its strength came from the fear and isolation it provoked in its victims. "We can't fight it separately," he explained. "A united community, sharing resources and protecting each other, weakens its influence. That's why our ancestors valued community so much. It was protection against the Wendigo." With snow-blocking roads and communications cut off by the storm, the village was on its own. Sarah and Thomas led a small group to Mikasi's old hut, seeking to complete the ritual that the old shaman had started. On the coldest night of the year, as the Wendigo surrounded the village, howling with voices that imitated devoured victims, Thomas faced his fate. He wasn't a trained shaman, but he carried Mikasi's blood and memories of partial teachings. "We don't need a complete shaman," realized Sarah. "We need the whole community acting as one." The final ritual would not be performed by a single shaman, but by the village as a whole, each person contributing their strength. While the Wendigo attacked, the community formed a circle, chanting the ancient words Thomas remembered, sharing food even though it was scarce, the last act of defiance against the creature that represented selfish hunger. The final confrontation would take place at dawn, when the darkness of winter finally began to give way, and the community would discover whether their unity was enough to banish the ancient horror that the melting ice had unleashed on the modern world. 5. Whispers of Bones. In the frozen lands of northern Minnesota, where the winter of 2025 stretched on with unusual severity, Dr. Eleanor Hayes was leading an archaeological dig in a remote area close to the Canadian border. A specialist in forensic anthropology with a focus on North American indigenous peoples, Eleanor had been called in after the accidental discovery of human remains by forestry workers. The archaeological site, located in a region historically inhabited by the Ojibwe, proved extraordinary from the first day of excavation. The bones found had anomalies that defied scientific explanation: abnormally elongated limbs, a distended ribcage, and a skull with disturbing proportions. "I've never seen anything like it," Eleanor commented to her assistant, Mia Chen, as she carefully measured a femur that was almost 40% longer than normal. "These proportions don't correspond to any known medical condition." The mood in the camp became tense when Ojibwe elders from the nearby reservation visited the site. The old shaman, Thomas Blackfeather, observed the bones in silence before uttering words that sent shivers through the team. "You have dug up a Wendigo. You should rebury him and purify this place immediately." Eleanor, while respectful of the native traditions, maintained her scientific skepticism. "I understand your concerns, but these remains are a significant anthropological discovery. We need to document them properly." Thomas just shook his head. "Some knowledge comes at too high a price. The Wendigo is not truly dead. Its spirit remains hungry, even in the bones." That night, alone in the makeshift laboratory, Eleanor began to catalogue the bones. As she touched the elongated skull, she felt a strange sensation, like a cold shock that ran through her fingers and up her arm. For a moment, she swore she heard a distant whisper, words in a language she didn't know, but somehow understood. Over the next few days, Eleanor began to change. Her appetite increased dramatically, but no amount of food seemed to satisfy her. Disturbing dreams populated her nights. Visions of snowy forests, relentless pursuits, and most disturbingly, the sensation of devouring human flesh with savage pleasure. "I'm just tired," she explained to Mia, who noticed the deep circles under her eyes and her mentor's increasingly erratic behavior. "This case is challenging." But Eleanor knew that something else was going on. In quiet moments, she could hear the whispers of bones, fragmented memories of a monstrous existence. She saw flashes of a previous life, an ordinary man who, trapped in a brutal blizzard centuries ago, had resorted to cannibalism to survive, only to be consumed by the Wendigo's curse. The violent memories became more vivid every day. Eleanor began to feel the creature's insatiable hunger, the compulsion to hunt, the perverse pleasure in devouring its victims. Even more disturbingly, she began to see her colleagues not as people, but as potential prey. One night, Eleanor found herself outside Mia's tent, watching the silhouette of the sleeping young woman. Her fingers, which seemed strangely longer and tapered, traced the outline of the tent's zipper. Mia's scent aroused a hunger that went beyond any human desire. Horrified by her own thoughts, Eleanor fled into the forest, where the snow was falling heavily. Under the moonlight, she examined her hands. The fingers really did seem longer, the nails sharper. His reflection in a frozen lake showed eyes sunken into darkened sockets, sunken cheeks. A subtle but undeniable transformation. "It's happening to me," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm becoming..." Desperate, Eleanor sought out Thomas Blackfeather in the reserve. The old shaman showed no surprise at seeing her. "The spirit of the Wendigo has found a new host," he said simply. "Its thoughts are no longer yours alone, are they?" Eleanor nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. "How can I stop it?" "The Wendigo's hunger is eternal," Thomas explained. "The more it feeds, the bigger it gets, and the greater its hunger becomes. It's the manifestation of human greed, of limitless consumption. To defeat it, you must completely reject its influence." Over the next few days, while the blizzard completely isolated the archaeological camp, Eleanor fought an internal battle against the whispers of the bones. She fasted, despite the excruciating hunger, refusing to give in to the growing desire for meat. Each night brought more intense visions, memories of bloody hunts through the centuries, dozens of victims, the gradual transformation from human to monster. The team noticed Eleanor's deterioration, her extreme thinness, sunken eyes, erratic behavior. They attributed it to exhaustion and isolation forced by the storm. Only Mia suspected something more sinister, especially after finding disturbing drawings in Eleanor's notebook. Skeletal figures with elongated limbs chasing terrified humans. On the 7th night of fasting, when hunger had become an almost unbearable physical pain, Eleanor heard the whispers more clearly than ever. They were no longer coming from the bones in the laboratory, but from within herself. The Wendigo was now speaking directly into her mind. "We are one now," the voice said. "The hunger will never cease. Accept it. Feed yourself. Grow." Eleanor, in her last moment of clarity, understood what she needed to do. Staggering through the blizzard, she returned to the archaeological site and collected the Wendigo's bones. With his last strength, he dragged them out onto the frozen lake. When Mia and the rescue team found it the next morning, they saw only a hole in the ice and footprints leading to it. Of the old bones and Eleanor, no sign remained. Months later, local fishermen reported strange sightings on the lake, a skeletal figure watching them from the opposite shore, disappearing into the forest when noticed. And on the coldest nights, some swore they heard whispers in the blizzard, not just one voice, but two intertwined, calling the unwary deeper into the forest, where eternal hunger awaited. 6. The abandoned mine. In the isolated mountains of Colorado, the old Buffelsfontein gold mine stood like a scar on the landscape, abandoned since its tragic collapse in 1874. According to local legend, a group of 20 miners were trapped in the depths after a catastrophic collapse, and when rescues were made impossible for weeks by severe storms, the survivors resorted to cannibalism to survive. In March 2025, 5 urban explorers, led by Marcus Hayes, a photographer specializing in abandoned sites, decided to document the interior of the mine for his popular online channel, Forgotten Places. The group included Eliza Chen, a historian, twin brothers Jake and Ryan Thompson, climbing experts, and Sophia Mendez, an amateur geologist. "This place has a heavy energy," commented Sophia as they approached the partially collapsed entrance. The Algonquin natives of this region believed that consuming human flesh transformed the person into a Wendigo, a creature with an insatiable hunger. Marcus laughed, adjusting his camera. "Perfect myths to increase our views. People love horror stories." The entrance to the mine was blocked by rotting boards with faded notices. Jake easily removed the barriers, revealing a dark tunnel that descended into the depths of the mountain. The air that escaped was surprisingly cold and carried a strange smell, something between rotten meat and damp earth. Equipped with flashlights, helmets, and 2 days' supplies, the group entered the main tunnel. The narrow walls were covered in old graffiti and 19th century mining markings. Eliza was meticulously documenting, photographing inscriptions that included names and dates. "Look at this," she called out, illuminating a deeply carved inscription. "God has abandoned us, not hunger. Bin sekis use yetmish dirt." After 2 hours of descending through increasingly narrow tunnels, the group reached a larger chamber that seemed to have been a makeshift camp. Remains of old fires, rusty tools, and, most disturbingly, bones littered the floor. Ryan bent down to examine the bones. Some of these are definitely human. They seem to have precise cut marks. A sudden and inexplicable wind blew out 2 of their flashlights. The silence that followed was broken by a distant sound, something between a moan and a muffled scream. "Probably just the wind passing through some narrow tunnel," suggested Marcus, although his voice betrayed uncertainty. The group decided to go deeper, following a tunnel that spiraled downwards. The temperature dropped dramatically with every meter. Sophia noticed something strange on the walls. Scratch marks that seemed to have been made by human hands, some too recent to belong to the original miners. At a fork in the road, they decided to split up briefly. Jake and Ryan took the tunnel on the left, while the others explored the one on the right. It was a fatal mistake. 15 minutes later, Jake's screams echoed through the tunnels. The group ran towards him, only to find Ryan alone, shaking uncontrollably, his face pale with terror. "Something's got him," he stammered. Something too fast to see clearly. It looked human, but it wasn't. Grey skin, sunken eyes, fingers too long. While they were deciding what to do, the lanterns began to fail. In the momentary darkness, they heard the sound of rapid movement around them. When the light returned, they saw damp footprints on the ground. elongated, deformed human footprints. The group tried to return along the original path, but quickly realized that they were lost. The tunnels seemed to have changed, as if the mine itself were alive, guiding them deeper. In a large chamber, they found disturbing evidence of the original miners' fate: torn clothes, tools broken in combat, and diaries detailing their descent into madness and cannibalism. The last entry, written in shaky handwriting, described how the survivors were changing, their bodies slimming as their hunger increased, their teeth sharpening, their minds losing humanity. It was in this chamber that they saw the first Wendigo clearly, a skeletal figure over 2 meters tall, grey skin stretched over prominent bones, eyes sunken into dark sockets, and elongated fingers ending in sharp claws. The creature watched them from the shadows, motionless, as if assessing its prey. When it finally attacked, it did so with supernatural speed. Ryan was the first to fall, dragged into the darkness as he screamed for help. The survivors ran desperately through the tunnels, pursued by sounds of movement and distorted screams that imitated Jake and Ryan's voices. In the depths of the mine, where the air was almost unbreathable, they found a terrible truth. The original miners had never died. Transformed by the curse of the Wendigo, preserved in a state between life and death, they had inhabited the tunnels for 150 years, occasionally luring unsuspecting victims to satisfy their eternal hunger. As the hours passed and their supplies ran out, the 3 remaining explorers realized the terrible choice the original miners had faced. Hunger was beginning to consume them, and the whispers of the Wendigos promised that only one of them would need to be sacrificed for the others to find their way out. The Buffersfontein mine would keep its secrets for a while longer, and when new explorers eventually came to investigate the group's disappearance, they would find only their abandoned equipment and a new name carved into the old walls. Hunger never leaves us. Insatiable. 7. The Forbidden Cure. In the isolated mountains of Montana, Dr. Robert Caldwell watched the snowflakes falling outside the window of his remote cabin. Winter had come early this year, and with it, the return of the nightmare his family had been facing for 3 years. As a renowned oncologist at the University Hospital in Minneapolis, Robert had dedicated his life to saving patients from cancer. But when his only daughter, Emma, was diagnosed at the age of 12 with a rare and aggressive type of brain tumor, all his medical expertise proved useless. After 2 years of failed conventional treatments, the specialists gave Emma just 3 months to live. It was then that Robert, desperate and ready to do anything, remembered stories he had heard from an anthropologist colleague about Blackfeet healing rituals. Against all his scientific convictions, he traveled with Emma to an Indian reservation in Montana, seeking help that modern medicine couldn't offer. "Some knowledge is not meant to be shared with the Wasichu," warned the old shaman, Joseph Running Bear, when Robert begged for help. "The cure you seek exists, but its price is too high." "Any price," replied Robert, holding the frail hand of his unconscious daughter. "I will pay any price." The ritual took place on a moonless night, in an ancient cave deep in the forest. Joseph explained that he would invoke the spirit of the Wendigo, an entity of insatiable hunger and immortality, to consume Emma's illness. The shaman repeatedly warned of the consequences, but Robert, blinded by paternal despair, ignored all warnings. The ritual worked. In just 1 week, the tests showed the impossible. The tumor had completely disappeared. The doctors in Minneapolis called it spontaneous remission, an inexplicable medical miracle. Emma quickly regained her strength, returning to the normal life that the disease had robbed her of. But when the first winter arrived, everything changed. As the days shortened and the temperatures dropped, Emma began to show subtle changes. Her appetite increased dramatically. Her eyes, once a vibrant brown, took on a yellowish hue. Her sweet personality gave way to bouts of aggression and irritability. "I'm so hungry, Dad," he complained constantly, even after huge meals. "It's like something inside me is never satisfied." The first victim was the family cat. Robert found only remains, and Emma, with bloodstains on her face, in a trance, unable to remember what she had done. Horrified, he contacted Joseph, who confirmed his greatest fear. "The spirit of the Wendigo now inhabits your daughter," explained the shaman. "In summer, it remains dormant, but in winter, when hunger and death overwhelm the land, it awakens. Each winter will be worse than the last, until she is completely transformed." Determined to protect his daughter and society, Robert sold his house and career in Minneapolis, moving to an isolated cabin in the mountains. During the spring and summer months, Emma was a normal, bright, and loving teenager with no memory of winter events. But every fall, Robert prepared the cabin, reinforcing doors and windows, stocking up on game, and eventually chaining his own daughter during the nights of the full moon. In this third winter since the ritual, the physical transformations were becoming more pronounced. Emma's fingers lengthened during the episodes, her nails hardened like claws. Her skin took on a grayish hue, and her teeth, particularly her canines, sharpened visibly. "I know what you do with the missing," said Emma in a night of temporary lucidity, tears streaming down her face. "The hunters and mountaineers you find. I know you bring them to me." Robert didn't reply. How could he explain that the accidents he carefully orchestrated during hunting expeditions were the only way to satisfy the Wendigo's hunger without Emma attacking innocent people? How could he admit that he had become an accomplice to murder in order to keep his daughter alive? "We need to put an end to this," Emma continued, her voice trembling. "The next time it takes over, don't chain me up. Let me go." "I can't," replied Robert, his voice breaking. "You're my daughter." "Not in winter," she whispered. "In winter, I'm something else." That night, as the blizzard howled outside, Robert contemplated the bottle of sedative in his hands. Strong enough to be fatal in the right dosage? Was it mercy or murder? Could he really kill his own daughter to free her from the curse he himself had brought upon her? From the next room, he heard the familiar sound of chains rattling, followed by something new, the distinct crack of metal breaking. Emma had broken the reinforced chains that had previously contained her easily. As the bedroom door slowly opened, Robert stared not at his daughter, but at the creature she was becoming every winter, taller, thinner, with hungry eyes that glowed in the darkness. Its elongated fingers held a twisted piece of broken chain. "Dad," said the creature in Emma's voice, distorted by teeth too sharp for a human mouth. "I'm so hungry." Robert Caldwell finally understood the true price of the forbidden cure. It wasn't just Emma's transformation, but the destruction of his own humanity, sacrificed in small portions with every terrible decision he made to keep her alive. As the snow continued to fall mercilessly, isolating the hut from the rest of the world, father and daughter faced the long winter night and the impossible choice between love and monster, life and liberation, hunger and humanity. And so we come to the end of our 7 horror stories involving the Wendigo. So, what did you think? Which story gave you the most goosebumps? Will any of them make you think twice before venturing alone into isolated forests during the winter? Let me know in the comments which one was your favorite. If you enjoyed this dive into the terrifying world of the Wendigo, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps the channel grow and motivates me to keep bringing you more scary content like this. And if you're not subscribed yet, take the opportunity to subscribe now and activate the little bell.